Good afternoon. The message is titled, The Reason We Give. The passage is from 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 7. We'll go ahead and get started. Now, the first thing we want to look at is this simple cartoon. Imagine you take your son out to a restaurant, and at the end of the restaurant, the son sees how much tip you're giving to the waitress, and he asks a simple question. How come the waitress gets 15% and God only gets 10%? And so in the United States, it's pretty common that after a meal is over, you would give a small thank you to the waiter or waitress by maybe 10, 15, 20%. But this cartoon is suggesting that why is it the waitress is getting more than what we give God? Something to consider as we think about this message. Another staggering statistic is that on average, the American church is only giving 2.5% per person. And what's even more shocking is that Christianity Today cited an article that during the Great Depression, the evangelical church in the U.S. actually gave on average 3.3% per person. So this is saying that the American church today is actually giving less than the individuals during the Great Depression. So the idea between giving the waitress maybe 5-10% more than what we give God based on our tithe and offering, and then the statistic that on average, even if the standard is set at 10%, on average, each churchgoer only gives about 2.5%. And so I wanted to share from 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 7. We'll go ahead and read the passage together. It says, "We want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in the wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, and as I can testify, and beyond their means, of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. And this, not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us. Accordingly, we urge Titus that as he has started, so he should complete among you this act of grace. But as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in all earnestness, and in our love for you, see that you excel in this act of grace also." And so I want to just point out a few things. The very first verse is more of a reminder. And so Paul is writing this letter to the church in Corinth, and he's trying to remind these brothers that, hey, we're about to take up an offering, take up a collection, and I want to just share the story with you guys, and it's about our other brothers in Macedonia. And so what happened is that in Jerusalem, they were experiencing maybe some persecution. They also had famine, and that was recorded in the middle parts of Acts. And so the churches that Paul has planted, he's asking each of these churches to contribute to the Jerusalem church. So the brothers and sisters in Macedonia, turns out in this dire situation that they themselves are in a severe test of affliction. Their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part, which is pretty interesting that they themselves are in the point of affliction and extreme poverty, but they were begging earnestly for the favor to take part in the relief of the saints. I also highlighted the two phrases in green, grace of God and act of grace, kind of like the bookends in the beginning and the end of the service, kind of saying, hey, reminder that this passage is because the grace of God the brothers and sisters doing this based on the grace that they have received, and even as they excel in faith, in speech, and knowledge, Paul's encouraging the church at Corinth to continue in this act of grace as well. Some of the verbs that I also highlighted is that Paul, he himself, could testify that these Macedonians were begging for the chance, and they gave themselves first to the Lord and then by the will of God, that they would continue to excel in each of these things. So let's take a little bit closer. And so I want to ask each of us, if we were in this point of affliction, extreme poverty, would we be able to give in spite of our circumstances? If we were in this dire situation, will we still be able to be begging for the opportunity to give? The idea of a Christ follower understanding and appreciating the grace that one has been given compels an individual to give graciously. The discerning factor is we evaluate how much we give versus how much we'll have left. I think a lot of times when we go out and purchase things, we usually calculate this will cost 100 RMB, 200 RMB, 300 RMB. So if I have 500 RMB on me, I'll probably have 200 RMB left. And so we usually think about how much we'll have left. It is a very small change in our perspective, the way we think, but we actually try to think not how much we will have left, but the priority would be how much we can give. This shift in perspective allows us to give generously because we understand the grace that we have received. Now I want to ask each of us a simple question. If we were still meeting in person today, what would be your favorite part of the church service? So just take maybe 3 to 5 seconds. You think about all the different aspects of the church service. You show up in the parking lot, you get to see your friends. Maybe it is the snacks after the service. Maybe it's singing of songs, the praise time. Maybe it's just sitting under the preaching of the word. But how many of us will actually say that it's the tithe and offering part, that when we get to contribute to advancing the kingdom, that this would be an act of worship? I think about this one other illustration of just how it says, God sees the heart gift and not the hand gift. God records what is in the heart, no matter how big the offering in the hand may be. Each of us should learn to give by grace through faith, just like when we were saved, from Ephesians 2:8-9. Instead of things possessing you, you start to control them. As one commentary says, that you develop a new set of values and priorities when each of us starts to think of excuses for not giving. We move out of the sphere of grace giving. Grace never looks for a reason, it only looks for an opportunity. And so I want to share this simple illustration. My son, he loves little toy cars. And so when I think about the chance that I have to buy him a little toy car, just to brighten up a day, and even though it only costs maybe 10 RMB, I never really think about